This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Sheela Hobden, and I am an executive coach and research practitioner. And in this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to fellow coaches and researchers who share my passion for the transformative potential of research in coaching. Through curious conversations and practical insights, this series aims to inspire coaches to embrace evidence-based practices and enrich their professional journey. Welcome to this next edition of the podcast on research and coaching. Today, I'm joined by Verity Symcox, an award-winning coach with an organisational psychology doctorate, specialising in mental health and well-being. She's also a lecturer. Welcome, Verity.
Hi, Sheila. So lovely to be here and see you again.
Yes, it really is. And I was checking back on how we'd actually connected in the first place and scavenged through my LinkedIn messages to find one in 2020 where I'd connected and said, thank you for a fascinating talk. I think you've been talking about your research. And then later, in February 2022, I dropped a note to say, can I pick your brains on research? Because I was looking at setting my own measures out.
Yeah, your project, yeah.
Subsequent to that conversation I think we had, you offered to lend me a book on research.
I did, yeah.
But the bit I remember most was when the book arrived with a bar of chocolate.
Yeah, chocolate is essential for a researcher. That is like the holy grail of research, chocolate. So I'm glad that you remember the chocolate.
Yeah, and I think that, yes, it was a sign of things to come, and I probably should have shares in some chocolate company. I totally agree. All the high percentage, the healthy stuff. So let's start today with what made you say yes when I invited you onto this podcast?
Well, firstly, because it's you, and I followed your journey from a practitioner into doing this research and everything else. So I'm a huge fan and supporting you in what you're doing in your project. So I was like, of course, Sheila. But actually, we kind of hover above that. And there's two things that spring to mind for me is dispelling the myths of research and what they look like and what research is. And also, you very kindly said, I've got a doctorate. I haven't got a doctorate yet. I'm working towards it. So I feel very passionate that I share that story, warts and all, because it's wonderful, but it's not the journey that I set out on. It's not what I thought it was going to be. And I just feel that by sharing that, I can encourage more people to look at research, to do a little bit of research, and quite frankly, contribute to what we're all talking about here, which is coaching, the body of evidence that really demonstrates that we know what we're doing and why we're doing it as coaches.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's funny because I nearly said doctoral student, and then I couldn't remember where you were in that journey. So I think it would be really interesting to hear what is in between what you thought it was going to be and how it has actually panned out for you, if you're happy to share.
Of course, yeah. I remember applying to go and do this PhD, and it was like this really big thing for me, and it is a big thing. And I was like, felt so honoured that the people that I'd asked to be my supervisors had said yes. I felt really honoured that I'd got to this place of being able to do it. I did take a year back, so I didn't start for a year because of COVID, and I'm really pleased I didn't, because otherwise I would have been doing PhD stuff and homeschooling and all of that. So it was a little bit delayed. And I remember one of the first interactions I had on my induction as a PhD student, they were like, this is just the beginning. And I was a bit like, what are you chuffing talking about? This isn't the beginning. Do you know what I've done to get here? Do you know where I've been? And I kind of got to this point, and that was a real eye-opener of, okay, so I am actually at the beginning of research and what that is and what that means. It's not this end pivotal point. So there was kind of this, I've done all this stuff so far with my master's, and I don't have an undergraduate degree, so I haven't come from a typical researcher background. But I've got my master's. I really enjoyed that. And, I've done really well. I've worked really hard. this is kind of the goal, to then suddenly be like, no, actually, you're just starting out again, was really unlearning the bad habits, but unlearning and relearning and adding to kind of everything before. I wasn't expecting that. I was kind of expecting, well, you've done a master's. Yeah, you'll be, I am fine, but you'll just keep going and it'll just be an evolution. And it hasn't. It's been a totally different learning experience.
What would you say is the biggest thing that's standing out that you learned when you did start at the beginning?
Patience. Patience. I am naturally quite an impulsive person. And particularly when I set my mind on something, I have a goal, I want to work towards it, and I'm very determined that I'm going to get there. And when you start a PhD, I don't know how my wonderful supervisors didn't laugh at me, but I kind of sat there and was like, no, I'm going to do this and I'm going to have all these aspirations. And I was like, no, that's definitely what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to have this intervention at the end that I'm going to pilot, and I'm going to have this, I had this whole thing drawn up. And I look back at it now and I think, wow, that's such an amazing aspiration. But I was so naive to think that I could do that in 5 years. That is my life's work, not 5 years. And that's the bit, the patience, the kind of, okay, you're going to slowly chip away, Verity, much more slowly than you've ever done, but you're still making progress.
Yeah, I can totally feel that, because I had it when I set out with my own research thinking I'll be done with this in 6 months. And here I am. Even once I was a couple of years in, I was still feeling that, oh, when's this going to get done? But now I'm really leaning into it, and I'm still sure there's lots I can learn about patience, but I've definitely become more patient as a result of it. So yeah, it's definitely learning there. Thank you so much for sharing. As you've been doing your research, I guess you come across other pieces of research that you find interesting. Is there something that you can think of that where you've read it and then implemented it into your own coaching practice?
Gosh, well, there's almost so much. So I think, well, I know one of the biggest shifts I've had post completing my MSc in coaching and then kind of going into academia and now being a lecturer in coaching is actually finding the rigor for everything. So even I was having a discussion around reflective writing, and this was only a couple of days ago. And we were talking about actually reflective writing as a tool and where's the evidence base? Well, in coaching, there's not a lot of evidence for writing reflectively and using that as a tool. And that was one of the moments. And I said to, this is me in a lecture, I said to my students, I said, actually, I'm just going to have a quick Google Scholar search. Let me have a little search. So I put in the keywords, coaching and reflective writing. Not a lot came up. So then I put in evidence for reflective writing. A kind of new nursing literature would have quite a lot because they're a practice-based discipline. So transferable to us as coaches in terms of they're doing nursing, we do coaching. And that's kind of just a real snippet example of actually then finding this little piece of research evidence that was talking about how nurses, as they learn writing reflectively, really helps them develop empathy, helps them with their interpersonal skills, helps them then with their nursing skills because they feel more confident and competent. And I was like, you could just replace the word nurse kind of like for like, really, while it's not done in a coaching research capacity. I was like, okay, what do you think, students? What do you think of what's here, this paper? So that's one little snippet of probably how my mindset has changed in terms of everything, whether it's I'm practicing or teaching or whatever I'm doing, has to come with a little bit of research and a little bit of evidence so that I feel confident that I'm doing my best. Now, that might not be directly from coaching because we're still growing as an industry. We're still seeking all our professionalization. We've still got this whole coming together, an emergence, and research will form part of that. But in its absence, and while we're still growing it, we need to look at other disciplines to underpin everything we do.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting that you picked the reflective piece because one of the other guests, Abhijit, was talking about how different coaches might reflect on their practice.
Yeah.
And saying it depends where you're at. And so he's an internal coach and he was saying, after he'd done a coaching session, he might bump into 10 or 15 people before he gets to his desk to do his reflection. And how is that influencing his work? So it's interesting that you're saying that there isn't much out there about that. So already there's topics bubbling up that could be researched. And if it isn't there, where do we borrow from? So there's so many different things being researched. And it's made me think, where did it all start? So this might be a bit of a sort of off the wall question, but I had this question: who came first, the coach or the coachee?
Okay, yeah. Do you know what, you say that, and the way my brain works and how I've really leaned into this as a practitioner and as a researcher is, well, can you be a coach if you don't have a coachee? My PhD work is in managers and their team members, their delegates, and in the literature that's leaders and followers. And I was reading that and I'm thinking, well, can you ever be a leader if you don't have a follower? So I feel the same for us as coaches. You know, I think we're symbiotic. You can't have a coachee without a coach and vice versa, maybe.
I was thinking about that as well, thinking, well, yeah, if you've got no one to work with, but how did the person who wanted the coach find the coach, because they didn't know the coach was there in the first place?
That is true. That is true. I think in terms of the underpinning of the history of coaching, we know that it comes from the business world and this, consultancy and that side of things. We also know that we borrow a lot from sports coaching and sports psychology. That's kind of underpinned a lot of what we do. But actually, if we move one step further as a psychologically evidence-based practice, then we're into the roots of psychology, we're into the roots of therapy, and we're kind of in that sort of domain. And I don't know, maybe that's a bit of research one of the listeners wants to do, Sheela, or you can do it next afterwards. What came first, the coach or the coachee? Or is it just a simple sale and demand?
Yeah. So they're definitely a provocation or invitation, for someone to take that question further. I'd be delighted to hear more. Yeah. And you mentioned at the start, I think you used the word misconceptions about what research is.
Yeah.
What do you think is important for coaches to know about research that may be misunderstood?
I'm not sure this is just within coaching, but I think there's kind of this stigma, maybe that's not the right word, but there's kind of this idea that researchers, we do the theory. As my brother kindly said to me, he was like, well, you're just doing the theory of it, aren't you? And I was like, well, yeah, I am. I am doing the theory of this. But the theory is really important, because without the theory of coaching or whatever you're going to research, how do we actually know what we're doing? And how do we know that it's helpful and it's supportive and we're helping our clients to achieve all the things that they want to do? But I think sometimes as a practitioner, when you like to go out and do things, you like to interact, you like to be doing the coaching, it can be a little bit, leave it to somebody else. Oh, okay, somebody else is researching it. Somebody else is coming up with the ideas. And well, there's two things. Firstly, there's probably a bit of me that was a bit like, oh no, that's behind this curtain. I can't actually see what the research is and what they do. I've got no idea what that's about. But then there's the other half of like, well, actually, a lot of our coaching researchers, they are practitioners. They either were practitioners first and who have turned to research to underpin and further their practice, or they found something that they were really interested in, or they were researchers that stumbled across coaching throughout their career and have really given us the kudos and these ideas and the ways of working that we've got now. You even go back to the forefathers of coaching, like John Whitmore. There's academic backgrounds now on the GROW model. There's been research into all of this. So even if it's not necessarily come from an academic starting point, we're always getting more and more people to kind of go, yeah, actually, does this work? And how does it work?
Yeah, I think that's a really important message, in that isn't something that kind of happens behind closed doors. And without practitioners, it can't really happen, because the practitioners are bringing the topics that are open for exploration. And if you were just sitting behind closed doors and looking at the theory in isolation, you wouldn't see what's actually happening in order to raise curiosities about it.
No, you wouldn't. And there's not a disconnect. I think there's been an awful lot of growth, particularly with the professional bodies talking more and more about research and encouraging more practitioners to consider research in their evidence-based practice. It totally is a symbiotic relationship between the practitioner and the researcher, particularly within the coaching setting. The reasons we can't do without each other or without being somebody that's got both of those dual skills is we need more evidence into coaching, and we're growing so rapidly as a profession that we all know the challenges. You just pop on social media and everybody is calling themselves a coach, whether they've done any training, they've got any accreditation memberships or anything. So we need to bring those together to help with our professionalisation of the industry and standardisation of practice. But the topics that practitioners encounter and bring to research may be very different from what the researcher who has more research focus than practice may bring. But I think they're equally important to get to where we want to be, not as individuals, but as a collective of coaches.
Yeah. And you made the point about the professional bodies there. And that is a really great source of material coming out, but also of a way to actually get involved, because the professional bodies want to build that evidence base to forward the industry. The other thing that is crossing my mind is I think there's a bit of a myth that research is a bit dry and a bit boring. And I think it obviously has to be done in a methodical way and one that, is credible. But I find you quite inspirational because I think you come across very with a fun and a light-hearted approach. What do you say about it?
So, yes, I feel, so when I'm laughing because you're like speaking back to me my feelings from a few years ago. When I first kind of thought, oh, actually, I'm going to do more than just an MSc. But even before that, there was kind of like, this is all a bit scary. I remember making a comment to my husband going, I've not got enough brown cardigans and I don't have enough elbow patches. And I kind of, in my sarcastic, flippant, humorous way, was just like, well, I'm going to have to go shopping then, aren't I? But there was this real thing of like, my identity, this vision of researchers with really scruffy offices, with loads of papers and kind of like what we see on the TV. And I was like, oh, I like colours and I like highlighters. I've got bright ginger hair and I'm kind of, all these things. And I was like, okay, how am I going to fit in this research academic mould? But the best thing I've loved about getting involved with academia, and particularly now I work in academia, is we are a really collective profession. And I meet so many people daily now that have got incredible brains and are interested in incredibly diverse topics and big things and small things and everything in between. And we've all got our quirks. I'm yet to see the brown cardigan brigade of researchers that I thought I was going to encounter. And actually what I see is lots of bright, colourful people and just lots of passion. And I think it's the passion that maybe we don't socially associate with researchers when you're not a researcher. I might be making huge masses of assumptions here. My analytical brain's going, Verity, is that really right? Are you assuming? It's certainly a perception, I will own and say I made. But yeah, I think there is that. But I'll also say that there are topics within research that I'd be like, gosh, that is just, I'd rather sit and watch paint dry for 12 hours than have anything to do with that. And I've got colleagues that think what I'm interested in is equally dull and boring. And I only really discovered that when I did my MSc piece of research that was in mental health and coaching. And I got really into the qualitative, the experiences, how do people make sense about it? And that was the moment when I was able to go, okay, so research isn't about numbers for everybody. It's not about statistics for everybody. There are a huge swathe of people, particularly in emerging areas of research, like lots of coaching and particularly human interactions, where we want to get really close to the subjects, the people that we're researching. We want to get, interviews with them. We want to get that closeness and richness. And for me, when I have my participants and I'm working with them and I'm doing whatever I'm doing, it's about the people. So as a coach, if I take my researcher kind of hat off and put my coach hat on, there is so much alignment because all I'm doing is finding out about people, and I'm finding out from the best possible way, which is through their eyes. So I think there's horses for courses in terms of what you find dull and not dull. And I know when I speak to the students now we have coming through that actually, I'll say to them, do something that interests you. You're going to read so much on this subject. You've got to do something that gets you wanting to pick up another paper and go, okay, what am I going to learn now from this piece of paper? And that leads back to my first point about passion. Researchers are incredibly passionate about their subjects.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was having a little chuckle when we were talking about the assumptions that get made. And here we are, two coaches having a conversation with these assumptions sitting there. And the first thing that we would do in a coaching conversation is, what assumptions are being made here, and explore that. So that was making me chuckle. But I think it's a really valid point that coaches love a conversation. And a lot of qualitative research is exploring through conversations. I mean, there's lots of different methods, of course. And so to your point, it sounds like there's two things. The topic needs to be really, really interesting to you. But also the way in which you do the research has to be a method that fits with what you're interested in. And if you're not interested in numbers, then don't do something that needs to be statistically analysed, for example.
Yeah. And I own this. I got a C at maths at GCSE. So when I walked in and did my first piece of research, I kind of thought, oh gosh, I've only got a C. I had to go to the lecturer at the time and be like, I don't even know what the mode, median and mean is. And I felt like such an idiot because here I am about to conduct a piece of research and, I'm there going, I've completely forgotten some of the basics that we should know before we even get to maths GCSE. And here I am in my late 20s at that point going, oh my gosh, can you just help me? But that really feeds into, you can be a researcher on anything when you develop those critical analytical skills. You don't have to be good at words and analysing the words, and you don't have to be good at the numbers. I'm a great believer of playing to our strengths and identifying our weaknesses that, yes, we can develop and grow, but I'm not going to be a quantitative researcher. That's never going to be the thing that I'm interested in. I respect it. I value it. It informs a lot of my qualitative reading and research, but it's not something I actively want to do. But I think the balance is being able to read those sorts of papers and have enough of a sense of what they're talking about so that I can then apply it either to my practice or to whatever I'm reviewing and researching and going to write about.
Yeah. You were talking there about strengths, and I'm wondering, what has the process of research done for you in terms of things that you can take into your coaching practice? Not necessarily the outcomes, but the process of doing it.
Well, there's lots of things, but structure definitely, particularly doing a PhD. It has to be a structured project. And I think having that understanding of how to structure something and where the different parts fit together is actually really a credit to us as coaches in how we work with our clients over longer periods of time. There are ebbs and flows in our client relationships, and actually navigating some of that in a researcher capacity is replicable. I'm structuring these two things and that are very different, but there's a lot of grounding in that. In terms of what have I found and discovered, there's a lot more in owning who I am as a coach that has come from owning the topics I'm interested in as a researcher. So that I'm really interested in mental health and well-being, and that's how we first connected. Obviously, that's your project as well. And I've really being able to do the research, been able to own that with my clients, that if you're going to work with me, this is something that I bring. I will bring bits of my research, what I found about mental health, particularly within a coaching setting. I'll bring that in, but I've done this. This is me. I'm owning it to the point where actively saying, I don't just want to do 6 sessions with my clients. I want to go a lot deeper, and that might buck what you think coaching's about, or it might buck, what we kind of typically say, but I'm going to own that. And the reason that's linked to being a researcher and developing those research skills is the thing no one tells you about research is you get rejected a lot. You build up an awful lot of resilience. And I talk with colleagues and about feedback they've had and, their journeys as well. And it's part of that process, probably a bit like, being a professional actor and actress. You get knocked back so many times. And I think within that, you really learn in what you want to say and how you want to say it and who that's going to most benefit. And that skills and that practice of kind of constantly going, no, you've got to do this, or no, have you thought about that, has been really useful for me as a coach to be like, this is who I am. This is who I am and what I'm going to bring to the world. And then, of course, there's really specific bits. If I'm working on a particular tool or I'm doing something and I can see the client's a little bit hesitant or, a little bit of like, oh, if we're doing some chair work or something, why are you making me talk to this chair? What are we doing here? And I will say to them, actually, there is research that shows this. So being able to just identify little nugget really helps in that process when you get those conversations. And they do come up in coaching. Clients do say to me, they're like, oh, hang on a minute. Yeah, I'm up for this, but why? What's going on? They want to know. They're inquisitive. So that's really important.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's doing a couple of things. One is helping you get clarity on who you are as a coach and how you work. And then the other being able to express that to clients, like the why you're working in that way. And I think ultimately that means that it's easier for people to then self-select whether they come and work with you, which makes it easier to find the right type of people that you want to work with. So I think that's a longer term benefit for your coaching practice. And there's certainly things that I do, like the number of sessions I do is linked to some research that I found around how many sessions and what the impact has. So totally resonate with that. Great. Thanks for sharing that. So if someone was interested in either taking part in some research or even just getting their hands on some, maybe leading some, I've been asking everyone this, what might I say advice, I know coaches don't give advice, of course, but what tips might you have? Now, what has already been said actually is to Google Scholar and ResearchGate have been coming through really clearly. So beyond that, what would you recommend?
So what do you mean, like where they can get access to research?
Yeah, if you know of any others access places, but also what sort of words of wisdom would you offer to people who are listening to this and thinking, oh, maybe I should take part in something, or maybe I should try and start some research?
Of the repositories you mentioned, so Google Scholar, ResearchGate, there's lots of those that are really accessible if you're just wanting to find out what's been done. But obviously you might not have access. So certain things you can get free access to, but others you can't. What I will say is a lot of the newer coaching books are tending to have a lot more academic rigor and references in them now than, if I'm being really honest, than when I kind of started my coaching journey, 12, 13 years ago. So I think a lot of the modern books now, you will find a lot of evidence or links in the backs of chapters of where you can go to. So that's a really useful resource. This isn't a plug for the professional bodies, but I do think one of the best things that's happened, and I've noticed this in kind of the last 18 months or so, is the response from all of the professional bodies here in the UK on encouraging research. And that's just in the coaching magazines that are produced. So these are things that obviously we have access to, and they're thought pieces sometimes, but they're often done by researchers, somebody that's done a bit of research, someone that's aspiring to do research or doing research or whatever. And I think they're really great places as well to have a read because they won't necessarily be written in a typically academic way, and that makes them really accessible. Again, LinkedIn, I'd say, is another really good resource for following researchers and academics because they will often put that thought leadership style, think piece stuff on LinkedIn. And they'll often cite the sources there that they've used, but actually they're really good pieces of information. And particularly, it's like anything, if you can learn to navigate your way through the wood and waffle to the people that are inspiring for you and the people that you know actually know what they're talking about, that's where you'll get, the straight from the horse's mouth? That's always a good place. In terms of doing research, there are lots and lots and lots of initiatives to get involved from. I know more of the coaching bodies are trying to encourage more people to do bits of research. Obviously, if you get really into it and you want to do a degree, there's numerous different coaching degrees available. And should you end up loving it, there are doctorate programs too. But within that, there's also a lot of research going on about coaching that isn't typically within our coaching discipline. So if you're interested in something else and you think, actually, I wonder if coaching fits in here, you will also find coaching is multidisciplinary. I would, again, say connect with researchers. We quite often, when we have to find participants, there will be call outs on social media is a great thing now, but there'll be call outs on places like that for people to get involved if they just want to share their opinions and be part of things. So there are lots of ways.
Fantastic. Yeah, loads of spaces. If you're following the right people, then you'll hear straight from the horse's mouth, like you say, but also pick up those call outs for opportunities. And yeah, the professional bodies, there's different ways that you can sign up to make sure you get alerted to those opportunities, which is great. I'm wondering, there may be nothing, but is there anything on your mind that you feel, we haven't spoken about this and I really wanted to speak about it? So just, is there anything still left?
Is there anything still left? Well, there's probably one tiny thing, but we might have covered it. So, do you know what? Let's go for it. I think one of the biggest things I would love to convey about research more generally, which has kind of been the topic of our discussion today, is it doesn't matter what your background is necessarily or what your schooling has been like. You find the right places and you find the right support and you find the right subject. And I can stand testament to that as somebody that is now partway through a PhD, didn't have an undergraduate degree, did a master's thinking, oh gosh, I went into that master's research project thinking, I am never going to do this. This is so beyond my capabilities. And you can do it. Anybody can do it if they really want to put their mind to it.
Yeah. When we visualize what we want,
yeah,
it is about creating the support network around you and speaking to people. And you and I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't reached out to you and you hadn't then offered that support back, which is amazing because it creates a ripple effect. And here I am hosting this podcast on research, which was never on my radar, but I became so passionate about it through various routes.
And I think with that, the other thing we probably haven't touched on is, what is the goal of your research? When we first spoke, and I remember saying to you, okay, so what are you going to do with it? You're going to plough. And I think I said to you years into this, and I think that's when you said something like, no, I'm going to be done in a few months. And I remember thinking, okay. But, I think identifying that, what are you going to do with it? Because it is a labour of love, whether it's a sprint piece, so, something that maybe takes less than a year, or whether it is a marathon. And that's the only way to describe them, as a sprint and a marathon. But what are you going to do with it? And how are you going to use that? Because doing the research is wonderful, but if we're not sharing the findings, we're not influencing anything.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's quite interesting along the project is, I've got over 60 coaches taking part, and I'm desperate to get them all together to talk about what we are finding. And I'm not even looking at the findings yet myself, because if I look at them now, that might influence the end, how I look at them at the end. And it's going to be November before I can get all that data to actually look at. But I think that shows me what I want to do with it. I want to give it back to the coaches, especially the ones that took part, but more so other coaches, around the world, because well-being is such a hot topic now. And if coaching has got any link to that in any way, then we need more people to understand that and see how it can be used in that way. So, but yeah, thank you for asking that question and getting back there. So it's been fantastic talking to you and seeing you again, Verity. Thank you so much for your time.
Likewise.
Where is the best place for people to follow, connect with you?
Definitely LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably the place where I put most of what is going on with my academic pursuits, I should say. So yeah, follow there.
Great. Thank you so much, Verity.
That's all right, Sheela. Thank you so much for having me. See you soon.
Bye. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and to make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub, enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.